Welcome back, everybody. If you can all take your seats, we can commence the conference part of the day. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome Professor Farida Fortune, who's the clinical lead from the BEHÇET'S Centre of Excellence in London.
Good morning, everyone. I have to ask the people at the back, can you hear me? Yeah, because my voice doesn't travel very well. So hello, it's a huge pleasure to be with the patients again. And I think the last time we were at Stevenage, okay, with your group. So thank you very much for having us. And I would like to say, before we start, thank you to Tony, who always hassles me to do the right thing. And then we always forget the people in the office. All right, and so thank you too very much. And I want a special thanks to you for continuing on the children's project. So one mum in this room will know her daughter died of BEHÇET'S. It was really traumatic. She was really young. She wrote a book, and if any one of you have not seen the video, it's still, I think, on the internet. It will remind you and us that in the late 70s, about 44% or more of people were losing their sight because of BEHÇET'S. In 2010, when I got a professional business case done on BEHÇET'S patient care, BEHÇET'S patients were costing the NHS more than £1 million a year because they were seeing numerous patients, and the time to diagnosis at that time was over 14 years. When I was doing my PhD, there were only 3 people in the UK seeing BEHÇET'S. That was Ali Jawood's boss, my boss, and someone at the MRC Centre. So 3 people, and so patients just never got diagnosed. Time to diagnosis now is 2 to 4 years, but most of that is patients being sent into the centres and waiting times. So once they're in a centre, time to diagnosis is under a few months. There's a few patients who have clinical signs of BEHÇET'S but don't fulfill that criteria. I now run an urogenital clinic because there's so many other medical conditions which cause urogenital ulcers. And as you know, in 2014, when the diagnostic criteria was changed, you had to have 4 for a diagnosis, and the ICCB criteria was 2 for mouth ulcers and 2 for genital ulcers. So this has resulted in huge numbers of people being referred into the clinic. Because of our contract, we have to see them, but it also makes, perhaps, although we have really good time to diagnosis, we would have even less. So when you do come to clinic, bear with us if you're a BEHÇET'S patient, because we do have other patients who've been waiting and are emotionally very stressed about whether they have the diagnosis or not. And it's very difficult for us. We have to manage those patients very carefully when they don't. So today is your day, and I'm just going to, and so thank you, everyone. There are people here who were here right at the beginning of starting BEHÇET'S, but actually having the centres had made a difference. And as Tony said earlier, once we have our database up in place between the 3 centres, and it's really important to push that because we don't want to go into the national database which means anyone could take your data. This way, I'd like to reassure all of you that your data will be protected. So if you came to the London Centre, we would hold your data, same as the other two, and we would then decide what projects to do and how that would form the basis and influence the research, right? So we want to get many more people involved, and the more people you have, the stronger your data becomes. The better your data, the better your treatments. Okay, so I've been there from the beginning, and as I say, I was doing my PhD. I won't tell you how long ago. Okay, so there's my team. You can't do anything without a good team, right? And actually, we have never lost somebody from our team. We've had additions and we have people at the peripheries, but the core team has remained the same. And even our new consultant, Valeria, came in as a trainee. And once she finished her training, just stand up and say hello, Valeria. Okay? And once she's come back. But you know most people, and then we very ably led. I might be the director, but Nados Wajikra is the boss. She tells us what to do. Yes. So she tells us what to do. And then the consultants are all very important because they all come with very special skills. And then we have people in the background, PhD students and researchers reporting it. And I would like to point out Dr. Amal Sanusi, who is she did a PhD with me, and now she's an amazing national data analyst. Okay, so you've been given the program for today, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the quality of life. So you remember before we started, we had a quality of life survey done, and we've now onto our fourth survey. Okay, so for your well-being, it's actually not so much us as the professionals. It's a part of your physical, emotional, social, and psychological background all impacts onto the way you view psychologically, how your brain processes, and how all of that is affected and how that affects your immune system. Of course, you've got your background genetics, which play a very important part. So I'm going to show you the quality of life survey. And this is only a first cut, right? It is not complete. So if you haven't done the survey, could I ask everyone if they could do it, right? It's very important because if you have a look, and you will see that the gender, so, you know, women, thumbs up for you, you always do the survey. So it's mainly women. Look at how many men, 30% are men and 1% of other. Now, we're not going to get good data if we do that. And then if you have a look, it's the same group, right? For all the surveys, it's almost the same group that's filling in the survey form. That gives us data, but it tells us about women, right? And it doesn't tell us about the other patients. And the other patients probably give us a bit more hassle because they don't take the tablets, etc. So that's really important. And then, as you know, this has got a genetic basis, but can you have a look? All right. The main are white British, okay, a small group of other European, and we're not getting anything from the other. And they're very important because that group has severe disease. So they tend to sit with the neuro, the vascular, and the ocular. And we need to get young men in here because they're the ones that have severe ocular disease. Okay, so if you have a look, how many people have received a diagnosis of BEHÇET'S? In 29, it was about 89%. And if you then look, that's so before we started the centers, and we're now up to about 96%. And so we're doing better. So once you come into the center, if you have BEHÇET'S, you'll have your diagnosis. And we quite sometimes you say, it looks like BEHÇET'S, we'll see you again 2 or 3 times before you confirm a diagnosis. In young men with posterior vasculitis, we always take them from Moorfields. So Harry was my PhD student. He will ring up and says, I've got a patient with BEHÇET'S eyes. And we always take them and see them in the BEHÇET'S clinic. And it's quite interesting because they go on to develop other symptoms. And if you don't treat them, they go blind. Okay. So what you report as triggering your BEHÇET'S symptoms is stress, fatigue, and seasonal change. The seasonal change is really important because if you remember, your immune system is hyper-inflammatory. So if you see flu or COVID, you might have minor symptoms, but it's going to trigger your disease activity. Okay, and this time of the year, Nadas will tell you, yet again last night, we started at 9 and we didn't finish our last patient till well after 6 o'clock. Sometimes it goes on to 9 o'clock. And it's this part of the year that people's disease is being triggered. And you remember COVID, and the data from that is, we thought you all going to have real problems. So can you remember, I put 85% of 850 patients on the national database. Okay, so you all had your food and whatever, and you had to stay at home. In fact, we probably had less patients who got COVID, and we had no deaths. So you remember there were 2 deaths at the beginning, but actually they had comorbid disease. They didn't die of COVID. So this time of the year, you have to be really careful. And, you know, if somebody's snotting next to you or coughing next to you, move out of the way. If you're in London and in a crowded train, wear a mask, right? Because otherwise you'll suddenly find your disease is active. So that's a seasonal change is really important. Fatigue, right? It's really important to keep yourself active, but don't drive yourself so mad that your fatigue will actually activate your disease. And stress. So we all have a lot of stress. There's a huge national stress. There's economic stress. There's personal stress. And yesterday we were doing a peds clinic, and the pediatrician was fantastic at teaching the children strategies of dealing with stress. And she's so marvelous. I said, you know what? You need to come and teach all of us, not only the patient. So when you are stressed, try and regulate your breathing. Go and do something that you like doing, right? Don't move into the stress, which is sometimes really difficult because it'll only get worse and it'll activate your disease. Okay, so that's what you say, and that is supported by research. Okay, and what symptoms do you experience with the disease? And you can see this is almost in accordance with all the national databases, whether it's the ICCP one, which was done across 31 countries, or the European one, or the ones we had here. So most people present with oral ulceration, and then genital ulcers come next. You can see with this comes joints, but it's not sort of arthritic type joints, which Prof. Jawad will talk about. They get these fleeting pains, and they move around. They don't just stay in one place. Stomach problems, and so skin lesions, it's a really important symptom for us. Now, everyone gets stomach and bowel problems. Part of this is that for the pains and whatever you have, your GP gives you analgesics. And almost always the analgesic has codeine or codeine derivative, which will slow the gut transit and in itself make you constipated. Headaches is another common problem with patients. Some of these patients get migraine, but migraine is not specifically a BEHÇET'S related symptom. And then, as we say, besides you saying eye problems, and it comes quite low, but if you know this cohort of patients, they've got mucocutaneous disease and would not have, very many of them have ocular disease, and you can see. So this is this cohort mainly of women. Okay, and then we put pathogy reaction, but I would say no one in this country knows actually how to do a pathogy. So keep on getting patients from the rheumatologist say positive pathogy. There's only one group in Turkey who do lots of research, who do it well, and then Dorian Haskard, if some of you will remember him, he had a big clinic at Imperial at the Hammersmith. He did a lot of research. People don't know how to do a pathogy test, so I take very little notice of it. Okay, and then you can see the people who make the diagnosis tend to be rheumatologists. And it could simply be because that's the major amount of patients that come through. And then GPs are bad at making a diagnosis. Oral consultants will send patients when they have ulcers that are BD-like. And we're trying to encourage them and teach them how to look at the mouth for specific BD ulceration. So what's happened over the years to the quality of life score for you? Remember, these are your data that when we started, I think people were so relieved that there were these clinics at the beginning, somewhere where they could go to, somewhere where people understood them, somewhere where they could share. Okay, so the quality of life when we first did it was quite good because, in fact, this quality of life was probably done mainly on the patients who came from our cohort, and our cohort was, I did a MDC at St. Thomas's, I think Richard will remember, where we had 4 different specialties. So that's a bit of a misnomer, the 209, but you can see in 2014, clinics are up and running now for about 18 months. And then in 2020, the quality of life is right down. And then we go into COVID, all right? So this was done just before major COVID. But I can tell you, in the autumn of 2019, the BEHÇET'S patients were all ill, all right? I think COVID was the year before, and especially of one of our patients, because we know 3 of our patients had contact outside of the UK and came back to the UK in 2019, November-ish, really, really ill. All right, so I'm sure that 2020, a whole load of you had a poor quality of life, COVID time, and now it's much better. Okay, so it have made a bit of difference, but I think we could do even more. So, okay, so just to summarize, if you have a look at the slide, the things that were important to you. So arthropathy, those are the joint pains. And then you go to 2020, neurological symptoms. And now the main problem that you report is fatigue. Okay. So fatigue is a very difficult thing to understand. And there was a huge survey done on, I think, about more than 10,000 patients with an autoimmune disease called SLE. And their main symptom was fatigue. So you'll find in all of these chronic ongoing illnesses, fatigue is a main problem. I don't have any funding, but a long time ago, before AI was popular, I saw somebody with Richard introduced me to a chap was in Hungary who was doing AI in about 2014, 2015. And I asked him, I said, could he look for two diseases, one of which is BEHÇET'S, at two molecules, which he identified. We did some research, and it shows, it's very interesting, it's two different molecules. One drives sleep, one drives fatigue. But if you have poor sleep, your fatigue levels go up as well. All right, so they're independent, but also, so they're independent, but they're common variables. I've never had enough money to get a PhD student to spend a full time looking at fatigue, which in BEHÇET'S, which I think is really important, because I'm sure if I ask how many of you here experience fatigue, yeah, you see, more than half of you would put your hands up. And people do not understand fatigue, a bit more since we've had COVID. So I say the only good thing about COVID, what was it? Was that people now realize that fatigue was a really proper symptom and would understand. And frequently when people had to stop work, they would be investigated because, they'd be fine in the morning, terrible at lunchtime or 11 o'clock. And what you need to do is, or the other way around, and people don't understand that. So you need to adapt your lifestyle along when but most of the time you don't know. Okay, so that is really important. So fatigue, we need to do a lot more work. I think we should do a lot more biological work on that. Arthropathy, Prof. Jowd, I'm not going to talk about anything about joint pains or problems. Prof. Jowd's going to talk to you in a very authoritative way this afternoon. And then mouth ulcers, okay? Once you're diagnosed, we know that you've got proper BEHÇET'S mouth ulcers, and the other people who have mouth ulcers don't have BEHÇET'S. Stomach and bowel problems, headaches, and neurological. So this is new. We do have a fantastic mouthwash, which was actually one of the BEHÇET'S patients' fathers helped me take to a pharmacy. And the people who use it swear by it, others don't use it, right? The best thing about using the triaurosol, it will not only heal the ulcers, but it will also stop scarring. You remember BEHÇET'S patients scar, and if you scar in the back of your oropharynx, you have, you go from this size to that size, or smaller than that. your tongue gets used to it and pushes the food up, but you'll get to a point where you start choking on your food. So it's really important to use your mouthwash and gargle. Put your head back. And I know 2 minutes is a long time. You get tired, drop your head forward, and then do the mouthwash. I will also show you, if we have time, how mouth ulcers trigger systemic disease. And we have very good research, actually, to show that. So this is about you and not my research. So impact of changing a career as a result. Those people who stay in any type of work, okay, have a better quality of life. And patients have said to me, even if I'm doing like 2-hour job in the afternoon, I feel worthy. The thing that patients say is, I no longer feel worthy. Okay, and sometimes they have to give up work, right, because they can't maintain it with their disease activity. But to get something else, even if you do a bit of charity at your local church and things, that will increase your quality of life. So from your data, those people who did better were those who stayed in their job. Patients who stayed in a job, they might have reduced their working hours or came out of their job and then went into something that was less stressful. But actually giving up totally is quite bad for your quality of life and your disease activity. Okay, so spoke to you about Charasol, and actually there's a little link on Sarah Sakur, who is the IT person, telling you on the internet how to use a mouthwash. So that mouthwash is now used all over the world. Okay. We developed it. An American, we have lots of people coming in from looking at the clinics, stayed with me for a month, said, what is this magic stuff the patient has? And then I said, I'll give it to you to use on your patients. Don't use someone else. He left, he went to the Mayo Clinic and they patented. So then I published a paper and put the recipe on there. So anyone could make it, all right? And I keep on going to America and seeing variations of this. And you get loads of copies because it works, right? And so it's important to use that for your mouthwash. And we know that that will also help improve your quality of life. Now, I can't see very many young people who might be online. I know 86% of you take recreational drugs. Okay, so that's no big deal with me. But it doesn't do you any good if you've got BEHÇET'S. So I frequently have a patient coming in and said, Prof, you have to work with me, because cannabis cures BEHÇET'S. I'm afraid the data doesn't show that. And you don't show that either when we look at your quality of life and the impact of it. So smoking, cannabis, and now people are microdosing. Who knows about microdosing in the thing? Anyone? One? Anyone else? Okay, so it's taking tiny parts of psychoactive drugs. So if you were around in the 80s, you would remember the Americans all taking psychoactive drugs. Do you remember? It was like a big thing and came here. Now people are microdosing and saying, for once I've seen God and the reality and blah, 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 blah. That's your lifestyle. But it has a hugely negative impact because you become very inwardly and self-focused. So it has a bad impact on also your disease activity and the people around you. Okay, and then we also found, and I think if we did this in a much larger cohort, we would find that the economics we have now, but more than that, the economic situation as it goes over our patient cohort is not good. And that then makes you stressed, it makes you worried, it makes your disease more active, right? The other thing is you're not eating what you should eat because you can't afford it. So I had one patient said, I either come to see you or I can buy some meat for the week for the family. Okay, so I don't even have enough money to save up a little bit each week to come. So we have a hugely negative economic environment at the moment, and poor people are much more affected. Poor people then don't eat well, and your gut microbiome is really important because that will drive your psychological state and your disease, and your oral microbiome. And you can see I've got we published a paper. I think we started in 2015 and then did the sequencing a bit later. It really has an impact on the outcome of eye disease, very much more so and driving your disease into becoming chronic. So what should we do? Okay, don't stop taking your medication because you feel well, because you're going to get ill. And we know Sarah is going to talk about medication compliance, and we've been doing some work with the ISBD, which is the international group, and compliance for all chronic diseases is very poor. And with BEHÇET'S is no exception. So in the morning when you wake up and think, oh, I can't bear taking the azathioprine, just stick it in your mouth. Please, okay? We all sometimes forget. But take your tablets, please, right? If I could look into your brain, I could tell you, probably 80% of you miss your tablets at some time. True, true, true. And then a smaller proportion sometimes don't take your tablets. Oh, I'm well. What do I have to take it for? I'm not sick. My BEHÇET'S is gone until, they get a cough, a cold, or some antigenic trigger, like change in the weather, and then they're very ill. And for young men, if you're online, take your tablets. Okay? Don't smoke so much dope. And come to your clinic appointment. Because it's really important, because you are the cohort who might go blind. And I don't want to disturb my figures. So you take it. So the rest of this conference is going to be focusing on well-being, because I think outside of taking your tablets, living well with BEHÇET'S is the most important thing. And I will tell you a story. As I said, I was very affected and still am by a young girl called Ruth. And we saw her at such a late stage, and she deteriorated and she died. Okay. I now have a lot of young girls who've been diagnosed even younger and are living and taking their exams and doing well and going into professions. So whatever you might think, you as a group and the BEHÇET'S Society and organization, having that and having the centers have made a huge difference. So I want to give my tribute to Ruth today, because I think of you almost every day. And when I'm seeing patients, and sometimes I feel there's nothing I can do for them, you just keep me going. Because even to the end, you were a real trooper and had such a tremendous faith that even when she was dying, she said, I'm going to a much better life. So for all of you who don't take your tablets, right, I'm sure there's a lot you can do and we can do with you to make a far better life. Okay, 5 minutes. And so I am not going to go unless I have a spot this afternoon, is just to say that what you eat will also define how your disease responds, right? And have you heard of a concept of the macrocosm and the microcosm? And the microcosm is your microbiome in your mouth and your gut. Okay, and that determines everything. Have you ever said, oh, I've got a nervous stomach? You really do, because there's a plexus quite high up in your small intestine that takes information back to your brain. Okay, what you eat will determine what your gut is. What your gut is will determine what your brain is. What your brain is will also determine how you respond. But we do have these other things, your genetic factors, and the way, so this is environment, which is important, and then you and your genetic factors, which make you hyper-inflammatory. So thank you very much.
Okay, so we're going to break for lunch now. So the presentations will resume at 1:45. So if you're in person, if you could be back in the room for 22. If you're online, take a well-earned break. Remember to join this afternoon with the afternoon link. If you haven't registered for that, then you can register by following the link on the website. And we look forward to greeting you back in the afternoon. Okay, thanks very much, everybody.